Eleanor Caldwell stood at the altar in her ivory wedding gown, watching the church doors slam shut behind the man who had just called her a monster in front of everyone she knew. The silence that followed was worse than his words. 200 faces stared at her from the pews of the Clifton Hill Baptist Church, their expressions ranging from pity to horror, to barely concealed satisfaction. Eleanor's hand instinctively moved to her left cheek, where thick scarred tissue stretched from her temple down to her jaw, the result of a barn fire 3 years earlier that had claimed her father's life and left her permanently marked. The scars were raised and pink, pulling slightly at her mouth and eye, a constant reminder of the worst night of her life. It was April 1883, and this morning she had believed herself the luckiest woman in New Mexico territory. She had believed Marcus Whitfield when he said the scars didn't matter. She had believed him when he whispered that he loved her despite everything. Now she knew the truth. He had proposed because her mother owned the largest general store in Clifton Hill, and he wanted the business connection. But when it came time to actually bind himself to a scarred woman for life, his courage had failed. "I cannot do this," he had said, his voice shaking as he stared at her unveiled face. "I tried to convince myself, Eleanor. I truly did. But I cannot wake up to that face every morning for the rest of my life. I am sorry." Then he had walked away, leaving her standing there in her mother's carefully stitched dress, the orange blossoms in her hair already wilting in the stuffy church air. Eleanor's mother rushed forward now, her face pale, but Eleanor held up a hand to stop her. She would not cry. She would not give these people the satisfaction. She gathered her skirts with trembling hands and walked down the aisle, her head held high despite the burning in her throat. The crowd parted for her like she carried some contagious disease. Perhaps in their eyes she did. She made it to the church steps before her knees buckled. The morning sun was harsh and unforgiving, and she could hear the whispers already starting inside. 23 years old and permanently unmarriageable now. The woman too ugly even for Marcus Whitfield, who everyone knew had gambling debts and a failing ranch. If he wouldn't have her, who would? Miss Caldwell. Eleanor looked up through tear-blurred vision to see a man standing at the bottom of the church steps. He was tall and lean, wearing dusty trail clothes and a worn hat that shaded his face. His horse, a sturdy paint, waited patiently behind him, loaded with saddlebags that suggested he was either arriving in town or leaving it. "I don't need your pity," Eleanor said, her voice rough. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The corset her mother had laced so tightly that mourning was making it hard to breathe. "Wasn't offering any," the man said. He climbed the steps and sat down beside her, a respectable distance away. Up close, she could see he was young, maybe 26 or 27, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were an unusual shade of gray-green like sage after rain. I was going to say that man's an idiot. Despite everything, Eleanor felt a bitter laugh escape. "You didn't even see what happened. Didn't have to. Saw him running out of here like his tail was on fire. Saw you walk out with your head up, even though I imagine you wanted to run too. That tells me everything I need to know." He adjusted his hat. "I'm Thomas Ashford. Most folks call me Trey." "Eleanor Caldwell. Most folks will call me the woman who got left at the altar by noon." "Then most folks are predictable and boring." Trey stood and offered her his hand. "You want to get out of here before they all come flooding out to stare some more." Eleanor hesitated. She didn't know this man, and her mother would be looking for her. But the thought of facing all those pitying, curious faces was unbearable. She took his hand. His grip was calloused and strong, and he pulled her to her feet with easy strength. "Where would we even go?" she asked. "I was headed to the boarding house to get a room and a meal. "You're welcome to join me. I promise I'm not a scoundrel, though I suppose that's what a scoundrel would say." He offered a slight smile. "I just figure you could use a friend right about now, and I'm new enough in town not to have heard whatever gossip makes people think they know your business." Eleanor glanced back at the church. She could hear voices rising inside, her mother's among them. She should go back. She should face this with dignity. But she was so tired of being dignified, of pretending the stares and whispers didn't cut her to the bone. "All right," she said, "but I should probably change first. This dress is rather conspicuous." Trey glanced at the elaborate wedding gown. "I'd say so. Though it's a shame. It's a nice dress and you look pretty in it." Eleanor's hand moved automatically to her scarred cheek. "You don't have to lie." "I'm not." Trey's voice was matter of fact. "You've got nice eyes, good bone structure, and that shade of ivory suits your complexion. The scars don't change that. They just tell me you survived something terrible." Eleanor stared at him, searching for mockery or pity in his face. She found neither. Just honest observation, as if he were commenting on the weather. Something in her chest loosened slightly. "My mother's store is 2 streets over," she said. "She has living quarters above it. If you can distract whoever's minding the counter, I can slip upstairs through the back." "I can do that," Trey said. They walked through Clifton Hill together, Eleanor gathering her skirts to keep them from dragging in the dusty street. It was a small town, maybe 300 people, nestled in the high desert country of western New Mexico territory. The surrounding landscape was all red rock and scrub brush, beautiful in its harsh way. Eleanor had lived here her whole life and never quite felt like she belonged, even before the fire. Caldwell's General Store was the largest building on the main street, a 2-story structure with big windows displaying everything from farming equipment to ladies' hats. Eleanor led Trey to the back entrance, then pointed him toward the front. "Just ask about horse liniment or something. Mrs. Patterson is usually minding the store on Sunday mornings. She'll talk your ear off." Trey nodded and headed inside. Eleanor waited a moment, then slipped through the back door and up the narrow stairs to the family quarters. She could hear Trey's voice drifting up, asking detailed questions about various products. True to prediction, Mrs. Patterson was responding with enthusiasm. In her small bedroom, Eleanor struggled with the buttons on her dress. Her hands were shaking too badly to manage them all. She finally gave up and simply stepped out of it, letting the expensive fabric pool on the floor. She would feel guilty about that later. Now she just needed to be out of it, out of the symbol of her humiliation. She chose a simple brown dress, practical and worn, and pulled her hair back into a severe bun. Looking in the mirror, she forced herself to really see her reflection. The scars were still shocking, even to her. The fire had melted the skin, leaving it puckered and discolored. It pulled at the corner of her mouth, making her smile asymmetrical. The doctors in Santa Fe had said she was lucky to have survived, lucky to have kept her eye, lucky that the scars were mostly confined to one side of her face. She had never felt less lucky in her life. She splashed water on her face, took a deep breath, and headed back downstairs. Trey was still talking to Mrs. Patterson, now apparently discussing the merits of different types of saddle soap. When he saw Eleanor descending the stairs, he made his excuses and met her at the back door. "You're good at that," Eleanor said as they stepped back into the alley. "At what?" "Making people comfortable, getting them talking." Trey shrugged. "Spent a lot of time on the trail with nothing but cattle and other cowboys for company. You learn to appreciate conversation when you can get it." They walked to the boarding house, a tidy establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who had come west with the railroad workers and stayed after her husband died in a tunnel collapse. She took one look at Eleanor's face and didn't even blink, just nodded and said, "I'll bring 2 plates to the dining room. Roast chicken today." The dining room was empty, most of the town being at church or the subsequent social gatherings. Trey held out a chair for Eleanor, then sat across from her. In the bright light from the windows, she could see him more clearly. He had a good face, she thought. Strong features, a straight nose that had probably been broken at least once, and those unusual eyes. There was a scar on his chin, thin and white, and his hands bore the marks of hard work. "So," Eleanor said, needing to break the silence, "what brings you to Clifton Hill?" "Work. I heard the Rockingham Ranch was hiring. I've been trailing cattle up in Colorado, but the outfit I was with sold off most of their herd. I needed a new position." He leaned back in his chair. "What about you? Besides the obvious excitement of today, I mean, what do you do?" "I help my mother run the store. Keep the books, manage inventory, deal with suppliers." Eleanor paused as Mrs. Chen arrived with 2 heaping plates of chicken, potatoes, and greens. The smell made her realize she hadn't eaten since the previous evening. "It's not exciting, but I'm good with numbers." "Nothing wrong with that. Most cowboys can't count past 20 without taking off their boots." Trey started eating with the efficiency of someone used to trail food. "This is excellent, by the way." They ate in surprisingly comfortable silence for a few minutes. Eleanor found herself relaxing slightly, though the morning's events still felt like a fresh wound. Finally, she asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you help me back there? You don't know me." Trey set down his fork and considered the question seriously. "I guess because I know what it's like to be judged for something you can't control. My father was an outlaw. Got himself hanged when I was 12 for rustling cattle. After that, every time something went wrong in our town, people looked at me like I must have inherited his criminal nature. Didn't matter that I never stole so much as an apple. I was John Ashford's son, and that was enough." "Is that why you became a cowboy?" "Partly. Hard to judge a man's parentage when you're all sleeping under the same stars and eating the same dust. Cowboys care about whether you can do your job and whether you'll back up your partners in trouble. Everything else is just noise." He resumed eating. "Plus I like the work. Suits me better than farming or clerking." Eleanor found herself studying him with new interest. "Do people know about your father here?" "Not yet. I've learned not to lead with that information." He met her eyes. "But I'm not ashamed of it either. I'm not my father, I'm just me. That's all anyone can be." Before Eleanor could respond, the boarding house door burst open and her mother rushed in, followed by Reverend Collins and 2 of the church deacons. Mary Caldwell was a handsome woman of 45, with the same brown hair and fine bone structure as her daughter, though without the scars. Her face was flushed with anger and worry. "Eleanor Margaret Caldwell, what on earth are you thinking?" She stopped short when she saw Trey, her eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" Trey stood politely. "Thomas Ashford, madam. I was just providing your daughter a quiet place to collect herself after this morning's unfortunate events." "Unfortunate?" Mary's voice rose. "That gutless coward humiliated her in front of the entire town. And now she's alone with a strange man, adding fuel to the gossip fire. Eleanor, come home immediately." "Mrs. Caldwell," Trey said, his voice calm but firm. "With respect, your daughter is a grown woman who just endured something incredibly difficult with remarkable grace. Maybe she needs a moment without people telling her what to do." The Reverend, a portly man with impressive mutton chops, sputtered. "Young man, I don't know how things work wherever you come from, but here we have standards of behavior. An unmarried woman does not dine alone with a man she just met." "Then I guess it's good you're all here chaperoning now," Trey said mildly. Eleanor surprised herself by laughing. It was a slightly hysterical sound, but genuine. "Mother, I appreciate your concern, but Mr. Ashford is right. I needed space. If you want to join us, please do, but I'm not ready to go home and face questions yet." Mary looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Eleanor's face stopped her. She had always been protective of her daughter, perhaps too much so since the fire. "Fine, but I'm staying." The reverend and deacons left with obvious disapproval, and Mary took a seat at the table. Mrs. Chen, reading the room perfectly, brought another plate without being asked. "Mr. Ashford," Mary said, her tone somewhat softer. "I apologize if I was rude. Today has been difficult." "No apology necessary, madam. I understand. You're new to Clifton Hill." "Yes, madam, just arrived this morning, staying at the Rockingham Ranch, assuming they still have work." Mary's expression shifted slightly. "The Rockingham, that's Walter Morrison's place. Good man, fair employer." "You're a cowboy, then?" "Yes, madam. Been working cattle since I was 14. Eleanor watched her mother assess Trey with the sharp eye she usually reserved for evaluating merchandise. She could almost see her thinking through his potential as a husband prospect and felt her face heat with embarrassment. "Mother, please don't." "Don't what?" Mary asked innocently. "Whatever you're thinking. Mr. Ashford was just being kind, that's all." "I didn't say anything," Mary protested, but there was a gleam in her eye that Eleanor recognized and dreaded. Trey, either genuinely oblivious or tactfully pretending to be, finished his chicken and pushed back from the table. "I should actually head out to the ranch. I want to get there while there's still daylight to find my way." He looked at Eleanor. "Thank you for the company, Miss Caldwell. I hope things improve for you." "Thank you for your kindness," Eleanor said, meaning it. "I hope the ranch works out." After Trey left, Mary wasted no time. "Eleanor, that young man was clearly interested in you." "Mother, he was being polite to someone having a terrible day, that's all. He called you pretty. You were listening." "I may have asked Mrs. Patterson what happened after you disappeared from the store." Mary reached across the table and took her daughter's hand. "Sweetheart, I know today was awful. Marcus is a fool and a coward, but that doesn't mean there's no hope for you." "Hope for what?" "Another man who'll court me for the store and then realize he can't actually stand to look at me." Eleanor pulled her hand away. "I'm done, Mother. I'm done hoping some man will see past my scars. I'll run the store with you and that will be enough." "Eleanor, you're 23 years old. You can't give up on love." "I'm not giving up. I'm being realistic." Eleanor stood. "I think I'd like to go home now. I'm very tired." They walked back to the store in silence. Eleanor could feel people watching from windows, but she kept her eyes straight ahead. Let them stare. She had survived the fire. She would survive this too. The next few days were as difficult as Eleanor had anticipated. The story of her abandoned wedding spread through Clifton Hill like wildfire. Most people were sympathetic, at least to her face, though she could see the pity in their eyes when they came into the store. A few were cruelly gleeful, particularly the women who had never liked her mother's success in business. Marcus himself had apparently left town immediately, taking the coward's way out. Eleanor threw herself into work, staying late to reorganize the stockroom and update the ledgers. It was easier than going home and seeing the worry in her mother's face. It was easier than lying in bed remembering how excited she had been just days ago, planning her future with a man who couldn't even look at her. It was Thursday afternoon, 5 days after the wedding that wasn't, when the bell over the store door chimed and Trey walked in. Eleanor looked up from the counter where she was measuring out sugar for old Mrs. Henderson and felt something lift in her chest at the sight of him. "Mr. Ashford," she said, pleased that her voice sounded normal. "How can I help you?" "I need some supplies," Trey said, approaching the counter. He nodded politely to Mrs. Henderson, who was eyeing him with undisguised curiosity. "Tobacco, if you have it, and some socks." I wore holes through my last pair on the trail. We have both." Eleanor finished weighing the sugar and wrapped it for Mrs. Henderson, who paid and left with obvious reluctance, clearly wanting to stay and eavesdrop. Once they were alone, Trey said, "How are you holding up?" "Well enough." Eleanor retrieved tobacco and several pairs of thick wool socks. "How's the ranch?" "Good. Morrison hired me on. The work's steady, the food's decent, and the other hands seem all right." He examined the socks. "I'll take 2 pairs of these, and I wanted to ask you something." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "What?" "There's a dance at the town hall Saturday night. One of the other cowboys mentioned it. Would you like to go with me?" Eleanor stared at him. "You want to take me to a dance, if you'd like to go." "I'm not much of a dancer, fair warning, but I can manage not to step on your feet too badly." "Mr. Ashford," Eleanor said carefully, "you don't have to do this. I appreciate your kindness, but I don't need charity." "I'm not offering charity. I'm asking if you'd like to spend an evening with me." Trey's expression was serious. "Look, I know you just went through something terrible. If it's too soon, I understand. But I enjoyed talking with you the other day, and I'd like to do it again. The dance seemed like a reasonable way to do that. People will talk. People always talk. The question is whether you care more about what they say or what you want to do." Eleanor hesitated. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. Trey seemed genuine and she had enjoyed his company. But another part, the part that had been hurt too many times, was screaming caution. "Can I think about it? Of course. I'll come by Saturday morning for your answer if that's all right." "That's fine." Trey paid for his supplies and left. Eleanor stood behind the counter, her mind churning. Her mother emerged from the back room where she had very obviously been listening. "You should go," Mary said immediately. "I knew you were back there. Eleanor, that young man likes you, and unless I'm very much mistaken, you like him too." "I don't even know him, Mother, so get to know him. That's what courting is for." Mary came around the counter and took her daughter's shoulders, forcing her to meet her eyes. "I know you're scared. After Marcus, I don't blame you, but hiding in this store for the rest of your life isn't living. It's just existing. What if he's like Marcus? What if he decides he can't bear my face? Then he's not worth your time. But what if he's not? What if he's exactly what he seems to be, a decent man who sees you for who you are?" Mary squeezed her shoulders. "You have to risk being hurt if you want a chance at happiness. That's just how life works." Eleanor spent the next day and a half agonizing over her decision. She made lists of reasons to say yes and reasons to say no. The yes list was shorter but more compelling. She liked Trey. He had been nothing but kind and straightforward with her. He didn't seem bothered by her scars. And if she was honest with herself, she wanted to go to the dance, wanted to feel pretty and desired, wanted to pretend for one evening that she was just a normal young woman. The no list was longer and mostly consisted of variations on, "But what if he's lying? And everyone will stare." Saturday morning arrived with bright sunshine and unseasonably warm temperatures. Eleanor was restocking shelves when Trey came in, wearing what were obviously his best clothes. His shirt was clean and pressed, his boots polished, and he had gotten a haircut. He looked nervous, which somehow made Eleanor feel better about her own nerves. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." "So," Trey said, fidgeting with his hat, "have you thought about my invitation?" Eleanor took a deep breath. Her mother was right. She couldn't hide forever. "Yes, I'd like to go with you." Trey's face broke into a genuine smile, and Eleanor realized it was the first time she had seen him truly smile. It transformed his whole face, making him look younger and impossibly appealing. "That's great. The dance starts at 7. Should I pick you up here?" "That would be fine. We live above the store." "I'll be here at 6:30. He seemed to want to say more, but just nodded and left, still smiling. Mary appeared from the back room immediately. "You said yes." "I said yes. Please don't make a big fuss about it. But Mary was already mentally planning, Eleanor could tell. You'll wear your blue dress, the one with the lace, and we'll do your hair with those combs Aunt Sarah sent. Oh, this is wonderful, Mother, it's just one dance. It's a start, Mary said firmly. That evening, Eleanor stood in front of her mirror while her mother fussed with her hair. The blue dress was her finest, saved for special occasions. It brought out her eyes and fit her figure well. Mary had arranged her hair so that it fell in soft waves, partially obscuring the scarred side of her face without obviously trying to hide it. You look beautiful, Mary said, her eyes suspiciously bright. Mother, don't cry. I'm not crying. I'm just happy. Mary hugged her daughter carefully, mindful of the hair arrangement. Have a wonderful time. At exactly 6:30, there was a knock at the door. Eleanor opened it to find Trey standing there, looking scrubbed and nervous. His eyes widened when he saw her. You look lovely, he said. Thank you. You look very nice, too. They walked to the town hall, a large building at the center of Clifton Hill that served multiple purposes. Music was already spilling out into the evening air, a fiddle and a guitar playing a lively tune. Eleanor's stomach was doing flips. Everyone from the wedding would be here. They would all see her with Trey and draw conclusions. As if reading her thoughts, Trey said quietly, "We can leave anytime you want. Just say the word. I'm all right. Just nervous." Me too, he admitted. I wasn't lying about not being much of a dancer. They entered the hall together. As Eleanor had predicted, heads turned immediately. The music didn't stop, but the volume of conversation briefly dipped. Eleanor lifted her chin and walked beside Trey to where punch was being served. Sarah Mackenzie, one of Eleanor's few genuine friends, rushed over immediately. Eleanor, I'm so glad you came, and who is this? Sarah, this is Thomas Ashford. Trey, this is Sarah Mackenzie. Sarah was petite and blonde, engaged to a banker's son, and had been genuinely upset on Eleanor's behalf about the wedding. Nice to meet you, Mr. Ashford. Are you new in town? Just started at the Rockingham, Trey said. Pleased to meet you, Miss Mackenzie. Oh, you're a cowboy then. Sarah's eyes sparkled with interest. How exciting. Eleanor, you didn't tell me you were being courted by a mysterious cowboy. We're just friends, Eleanor said quickly, though she felt her face heating. For now, Trey said with a slight smile, and Eleanor's heart did a little skip. They spent the next hour socializing. Trey was easy with people, friendly without being overly familiar. He stood close enough to Eleanor to make it clear they were together, but not so close as to be improper. When people stared at her scars, which several did with undisguised curiosity, he simply ignored it and kept talking. Finally, a waltz began and Trey offered his hand. Would you like to dance? Eleanor hesitated. Dancing meant being the center of attention. But it also meant being in Trey's arms, and that suddenly seemed worth the stares. Yes. Trey led her onto the floor. He hadn't been lying about his dancing skills, which were merely adequate, but he was confident enough not to fumble. Eleanor found herself relaxing into the music, into the simple pleasure of moving with a partner. Trey held her properly, one hand at her waist, the other holding hers, and she could feel the warmth of him through the layers of fabric. You're a good dancer, he said. My mother made sure I had lessons. She had hopes of me marrying well. Eleanor heard the bitterness in her voice and winced. Sorry, that sounded self-pitying. It sounded honest, nothing wrong with that. Trey guided her through a turn. For what it's worth, I think you're marrying well right now. Mr. Ashford, this is our first outing together. That's a bit presumptuous. Maybe, but I'm a straightforward man, Miss Caldwell. I like you. I think you might like me too. I'd like to see where that goes. He met her eyes steadily. And before you worry about it, yes, I see your scars. They don't bother me. You want to know why? Why? Because when I look at you, I see a woman who walked out of that church with her head high. I see someone who's good at her job and kind to customers. I see pretty eyes and a nice smile. The scars are just part of the picture, not the whole thing. Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. You barely know me. Then let me get to know you better. That's all I'm asking. They danced 2 more dances, and by the third, people had mostly stopped staring and returned to their own conversations. Eleanor saw her mother watching from the sidelines, beaming with pride and hope. She saw a few envious glances from other women, which gave her a petty sense of satisfaction. And she saw Trey, looking at her like she was the only woman in the room. When the dance ended, Trey walked her home. The evening air had turned cool, and Eleanor shivered slightly. Without a word, Trey shrugged out of his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. It smelled like leather and horses and something uniquely him. At the door to the store, they paused. Eleanor knew she should probably invite him in, offer him coffee, be properly social. But she was suddenly overwhelmed by the evening, by the feeling of maybe, possibly being wanted. Thank you, she said. I had a lovely time. So did I. Trey hesitated, then said, Can I see you again? Maybe Sunday after church. We could go for a ride if you know how. I know how. My father taught me before he died. Then it's a date. Eleanor thought about all her reasons for saying no, all her fears and doubts. Then she thought about how it had felt to dance with him, to be looked at like she mattered. Yes, it's a date. Trey's smile was worth every risk. Good night, Eleanor. Good night, Trey. She watched him walk away into the darkness, then went inside where her mother was waiting with 1,000 questions. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of wonder for Eleanor. Trey courted her properly, calling on her regularly, taking her on chaperoned outings, bringing her small gifts like wildflowers and smooth stones from the creek. He met with her mother's approval, which Eleanor suspected had as much to do with his obvious devotion as his stable employment. They went on the promised ride, and Eleanor rediscovered her love of horses. Trey borrowed a gentle mare from the ranch, and they rode out into the high desert, talking about everything and nothing. He told her about growing up with a notorious father, about learning to prove himself through action rather than words. She told him about the fire, about how her father had gone back into the burning barn to save their horses and never come out, about how she had tried to follow him and gotten her scars for her trouble. He was a brave man, Trey said. He was a foolish man who left us alone, Eleanor said, surprising herself with the bitterness. The horses weren't worth his life. Maybe not to you, but to him they might have been. Some people can't leave a creature to suffer even to save themselves. Trey was quiet for a moment. My father was a bad man in a lot of ways, but he loved animals. He got hanged partly because he refused to name the men he was working with. Said it wasn't honorable to betray your partners, even if they were criminals. I've never been sure whether to admire that or curse him for it. Both probably, Eleanor said. People are complicated. Yes, they are. They rode in comfortable silence after that, the desert stretching out around them in shades of red and gold. Eleanor felt something settling in her chest, something like peace. As the weeks passed, Eleanor watched Trey carefully for signs that his interest was waning, that he was beginning to notice her scars more and like what he saw less. She waited for him to become distant, to make excuses not to see her. It never happened. If anything, he became more attentive, more openly affectionate within the bounds of propriety. He started coming to the store during his rare free time, helping her lift heavy boxes and reorganize high shelves. He made her laugh with stories about the other ranch hands and their antics. He brought her books from the ranch owner's library, having noticed she liked to read. He introduced her to his horse, a paint named Checkers, who nuzzled her hand looking for treats. In turn, Eleanor introduced him to her world. She showed him the careful bookkeeping that kept the store profitable, explained the complexities of ordering supplies across territory lines, taught him about the different qualities of fabric and which customers preferred what. He listened with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions, treating her work as valuable and important. One evening in late May, they were sitting on the bench outside the store, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. Trey had come by after work, still dusty from the range, and Eleanor had brought out lemonade. Her mother was inside, maintaining the fiction of not listening while absolutely listening. "Eleanor," Trey said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I need to tell you something." Eleanor's stomach tightened. Here it was, the rejection she had been waiting for. "What is it?" "I'm falling in love with you. I probably shouldn't say it yet, it's too soon, but I'm not good at keeping things to myself." He turned to look at her, those gray-green eyes serious and intent. "I know you're still healing from what Marcus did. I know you have reasons not to trust easy words, but I wanted you to know, you don't have to say anything back. I just needed to be honest." Eleanor stared at him, her heart pounding. "You're falling in love with me?" "Yes." "Why?" Trey blinked. "What do you mean, why?" "I mean, why me? I'm scarred and difficult and suspicious. There are plenty of prettier, easier women in Clifton Hill." "I don't want prettier or easier, I want you." Trey set down his lemonade and took her hand. "You're smart and strong and honest. You survived something terrible and didn't let it break you. You work hard. You're kind to people even when they don't deserve it. You make me laugh. When I'm with you, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." He squeezed her hand gently. "And for what it's worth, I do think you're pretty. But even if I didn't, I'd still be falling for you because of who you are." Eleanor felt tears running down her cheeks, the scarred side and the unmarked side alike. "I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, but I am." "Why were you trying not to?" "Because I'm scared. Because Marcus said he loved me and then couldn't go through with it. Because I keep waiting for you to realize what you've gotten yourself into and run." "Eleanor." Trey reached up and gently cupped her scarred cheek, making her gasp. No one touched her scars, not even her mother unless necessary. "I'm not Marcus. I'm not going anywhere. And I've known exactly what I was getting into from the moment I met you on those church steps. I'm getting a chance to love a remarkable woman if she'll let me." Eleanor turned her face into his palm, letting herself believe it for the first time. He wasn't flinching. He wasn't looking away. He was touching her scars like they were just another part of her, no more or less important than her hand or her hair. "I'll let you," she said. Trey smiled and leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Their first kiss was gentle and sweet, tasting of lemonade and promise. When they pulled apart, Eleanor was smiling through her tears. From inside the store, they heard a very unsubtle sound of excitement. Trey laughed. "I think your mother approves. I think the whole town will know by morning. Let them know. I'm not ashamed of courting you, Eleanor. I'm proud of it." That night, Eleanor lay in bed feeling lighter than she had in years. She was still scared, still waiting for the other shoe to drop, but underneath that was a growing foundation of hope. Trey said he loved her. He had touched her scars without flinching. Maybe, just maybe, she could have the life she had stopped letting herself dream about. Over the next few weeks, Trey's courtship became more serious. He asked Mary's permission to take Eleanor on longer, less chaperoned outings. He brought her to a ranch barbecue, where she met his employer Walter Morrison and the other cowboys, who treated her with friendly respect. He talked about the future in ways that included her, making plans for things they could do when autumn came, when winter arrived. In late June, Walter Morrison came into the store looking for Trey. Eleanor directed him to the back room where Trey was helping reorganize the hardware supplies. "Ashford," Walter said, I need to talk to you about something. Trey emerged, wiping his hands on his pants. Yes, sir. I'm expanding the ranch operation, buying up some land to the south. I need a foreman I can trust to manage the new section. The job comes with a house and a significant pay increase. I want to offer it to you. Trey's eyes widened. Sir, I've only been working for you a few months. And in that time, you've proven yourself reliable, hardworking, and good with the men. You've got natural leadership skills, Ashford. This is a good opportunity. Walter glanced at Eleanor, who was trying not to obviously eavesdrop, particularly if you're thinking about settling down soon. I am thinking about that, sir. Then think about this too. I need an answer by the end of the week. After Walter left, Trey looked at Eleanor with an expression she couldn't quite read. Did you hear all that? Most of it, Eleanor admitted. Trey, that's wonderful. It's a lot of responsibility. You can handle it. Trey came around the counter and took both her hands. Eleanor, if I take this job, I'll be here permanently. I'll have a house and a steady income. I'll be able to support a family. Eleanor's heart started racing. What are you saying? I'm saying that I want to marry you. I know it's only been a couple months and maybe that's too fast, but I'm sure of my feelings. I love you, Eleanor Caldwell. Will you marry me? Eleanor stared at him, her mind reeling. This was everything she wanted and everything she was terrified of. Trey, are you sure? Really sure? Because I couldn't bear it if you changed your mind, if you left me at the altar like Marcus did. I won't. Eleanor, I swear to you, I won't. Trey squeezed her hands. I'm not asking you to say yes right this second. Take time to think about it, but know that I mean it. You're what I want. Beauty isn't what I'm after. I'm after a partner, a companion, someone I can build a life with. That's you. Beauty isn't what I'm after, Eleanor repeated softly. Something about those words settled deep in her chest. You really mean that, with everything in me? Eleanor took a shaky breath. She could play it safe, ask for more time, wait to be more certain, but she was tired of playing it safe. She was tired of letting fear make her decisions. Yes. Yes. Yes, I'll marry you. I love you, Trey Ashford, and I want to build a life with you. Trey let out a whoop of joy and picked her up, spinning her around in the middle of the store. Eleanor laughed, clutching his shoulders, feeling more alive than she had since before the fire. When he set her down, he kissed her soundly, not caring that they were in public view. When they finally broke apart, Mary was standing in the doorway from the back room, openly crying happy tears. I take it I should start planning a wedding, she asked. Yes, madam, Trey said, grinning. If you don't mind having me for a son-in-law. Mind, I'm delighted. Mary rushed forward and hugged them both. Oh, Eleanor, I'm so happy for you. The wedding was planned for August, giving them time to do it properly but not so long that doubts could creep in. This time, Eleanor was determined to enjoy the process. She chose a simple cream dress rather than elaborate white, acknowledging that this was her second attempt at marriage even though the first hadn't actually happened. She kept the guest list smaller, inviting only people she genuinely cared about. Trey took the foreman position and moved into the small house on the southern section of the Rocking M. It was a modest building, just 4 rooms, but it was sturdy and had a good well and a view of the mountains. He and Eleanor spent several evenings there, planning how they would furnish it, where they would put a garden, how many children they hoped to have. At least 3, Trey said one evening as they sat on the porch steps watching the sunset. I was an only child and it was lonely. 3 sounds good. 2 boys and a girl maybe, or 3 girls, or 3 boys. I don't care as long as they're healthy and happy. Eleanor leaned against his shoulder. Do you think they'll inherit my scars? I've wondered if there's something in my blood now. That's not how scars work, love. But even if they did, they'd still be beautiful because they'd be ours. As the wedding day approached, Eleanor found herself remarkably calm. There were none of the jitters she had experienced before the failed marriage to Marcus. She knew, bone deep, that Trey would be there. He had proven himself over and over in small ways and large. He didn't just say he loved her, he showed it constantly. The night before the wedding, Sarah came to stay with Eleanor, as was traditional. They sat up late, talking and laughing. "I'm so glad you found him," Sarah said. "After what Marcus did, I was worried you'd give up." "I almost did, but Trey wouldn't let me," Eleanor smiled. "He's stubborn that way. All the best husbands are." Sarah squeezed her hand. "You deserve this happiness, Eleanor, don't ever doubt that." The wedding day dawned clear and hot, typical for August in New Mexico territory. Eleanor dressed carefully in her cream gown, and Mary helped arrange her hair with small white flowers. Looking in the mirror, Eleanor saw not a scarred woman trying to hide her damage, but a bride preparing to marry the man she loved. They held the ceremony at the church again, because Eleanor refused to let her previous humiliation taint the building forever. This time, when she walked down the aisle, Trey was waiting at the altar. His face lit up when he saw her, and there was no hesitation, no doubt in his eyes, just love and joy and certainty. Reverend Collins performed the ceremony with his usual solemn dignity. When he asked if anyone objected to the union, there was a moment of tense silence, everyone remembering what had happened last time. Then the moment passed, and the Reverend continued. "Do you, Thomas Ezra Ashford, take Eleanor Margaret Caldwell to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do," Trey said firmly, his eyes never leaving Eleanor's face. "And do you, Eleanor Margaret Caldwell, take Thomas Ezra Ashford to be your lawfully wedded husband?" "I do," Eleanor said, her voice strong and clear. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Trey grinned and pulled Eleanor close, kissing her thoroughly while the congregation cheered. When they pulled apart, both were beaming. They walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, and Eleanor felt nothing but joy. The reception was held at the town hall, with food and music and dancing. Trey barely left her side all evening, touching her constantly as if to reassure himself she was real. "Happy?" he asked as they danced their third waltz of the evening. "Happier than I knew was possible," Eleanor said honestly. "Good. That's how I want you to feel every day for the rest of our lives." They spent their wedding night at the house on the ranch, which Trey had filled with wildflowers. He carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the main room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ashford," he said. "Mrs. Ashford," Eleanor repeated, trying out the name. "I like the sound of that." "So do I." Their wedding night was tender and sweet, Trey treating her like something precious. When he undressed her and saw the scars that extended down her shoulder and arm, he kissed each one gently, making her cry with the simple acceptance of the gesture. They loved each other with the passion of young newlyweds, and the care of people who had both been hurt and were determined not to hurt each other. Afterward, lying in bed with Eleanor's head on his chest, Trey said, "I need to tell you something." Eleanor tensed slightly. "What?" "That first day when I saw you on the church steps, I had already heard what happened. I was in the general store earlier, and the clerk was gossiping about it with some customers." Eleanor lifted her head to look at him. "You knew?" "I knew some man had called off his wedding because his bride was scarred. I didn't know who or what the circumstances were." Trey met her eyes. "I went to that church specifically to see if you needed help. I was angry on your behalf before I even met you." "Why?" "Because I've spent my whole life being judged for something that has nothing to do with who I am. My father's crimes aren't my crimes, and your scars aren't a reflection of your worth as a person. They're just proof you survived." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "When I saw you walk out of that church with your head up, I knew I was looking at someone special. Everything since then has just confirmed it." Eleanor kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into it. "Thank you for being stubborn enough to pursue me even when I was determined to hide." "Always," Trey promised. They settled into married life with remarkable ease. Eleanor continued helping her mother at the store 3 days a week, while Trey managed the southern section of the ranch. Their evenings were spent together, cooking dinner, tending the small garden Eleanor planted, talking about their days. It was simple and domestic and everything Eleanor had dreamed of. In October, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. She told Trey over dinner, watching nervously for his reaction. His face transformed with joy, and he immediately knelt beside her chair, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said in wonder. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Eleanor, I'm ecstatic." He looked up at her. "How are you feeling? Are you well? Do you need anything?" Eleanor laughed at his sudden flurry of concern. "I'm fine. A little queasy in the mornings, but the doctor says that's normal." Trey became even more attentive after that, if such a thing were possible. He worried about her constantly, insisting she not lift anything heavy, making sure she ate enough, tucking blankets around her in the evenings. Eleanor found it both touching and occasionally exasperating. "Trey, I'm pregnant, not fragile," she said one evening when he tried to stop her from reaching for a high shelf. "I know, I just want to make sure you're safe." "I'm safe. The baby's safe. We're all fine." But she let him fuss because she understood the deeper fear underneath it. He had lost his mother to illness when he was young, and his father shortly after that. He was terrified of losing her too. The pregnancy progressed normally through the winter. Eleanor's stomach grew round, and she felt the baby kick for the first time in January while she was helping at the store. She gasped and put her hand on her belly, and the baby kicked again, as if saying hello. Mary saw her expression and rushed over. "Is everything all right?" "The baby kicked," Eleanor said, smiling. "Here, feel." Mary placed her hand on Eleanor's stomach and felt the next kick. Her eyes filled with tears. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm going to be a grandmother." "The best grandmother," Eleanor assured her. In March, Eleanor went into labor on a cold night when Trey was out checking on some new calves. Mary was with her, thank goodness, and sent one of the ranch hands racing to find Trey while she helped Eleanor through the early contractions. By the time Trey burst through the door, wild-eyed and terrified, Eleanor was well into active labor. The doctor had arrived, a steady older man named Dr. Pierce, who had delivered half the babies in Clifton Hill. "Is she all right?" Trey demanded. "She's fine," Dr. Pierce said calmly. "Labor is proceeding normally. Why don't you hold her hand and stay out of my way?" Trey did as instructed, gripping Eleanor's hand and murmuring encouragement while she worked through the pain. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning, but finally, as the sun rose, their baby entered the world with a healthy cry. "It's a boy, Doctor," Pierce announced, cleaning the infant and wrapping him in a blanket. Eleanor reached for her son with trembling arms. He was tiny and red and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn gray-green like his father's. She looked at Trey, who was staring at the baby with an expression of absolute awe. "We have a son," she said. "We have a son," Trey repeated. He touched the baby's tiny hand and the infant's fingers wrapped around his thumb. "Hello, little one, I'm your papa." They named him Thomas Matthew, after Trey and Eleanor's father. Little Thomas, or Tommy as they quickly started calling him, was a content baby who slept reasonably well and rarely fussed. Trey was a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint and walking the floor with Tommy when he was colicky. Eleanor would often wake in the night to find Trey simply sitting with their son, watching him sleep with that same expression of wonder. "I can't believe he's ours," Trey said one night when Eleanor found him like that. "He's definitely ours. He has your stubborn chin." Trey laughed quietly. "Poor kid." Life settled into a new rhythm with Tommy. Eleanor cut back her time at the store to just 1 day a week, wanting to be home with her baby. Trey continued his work at the ranch, but came home for lunch every day to see his wife and son. They were exhausted and happy navigating parenthood together with the same partnership they brought to everything else. When Tommy was 6 months old, Eleanor realized she was pregnant again. This time the news was met with slightly less surprise and equally great joy. Their daughter, Clara Rose, was born the following spring, a tiny thing with Eleanor's brown hair and a healthy set of lungs. Tommy, now a wobbly toddler, was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her constantly under careful supervision. The years passed in the good kind of blur. Another son, Henry, arrived 2 years after Clara. The house grew crowded and loud and full of love. Trey added on extra rooms to accommodate their growing family. Eleanor's mother retired from the store and sold it, moving into a small house in town where the grandchildren could visit frequently. Clifton Hill changed too, growing slowly as the railroad expanded and new settlers arrived. But for Eleanor and Trey, the core of their life remained the same. They worked hard, raised their children, and loved each other through the everyday challenges and triumphs. Eleanor's scars faded somewhat over time, the angry pink softening to white, but they never disappeared. She stopped trying to hide them, stopped thinking of them as shameful. They were part of her story, part of what made her who she was. Her children grew up knowing that Mama had scars from a fire, but it was just a fact, no more remarkable than Papa being tall or Grandma having gray hair. One evening when Tommy was 10, Clara 8, and Henry 6, the family was sitting on the porch after dinner. The children were playing a complicated game involving sticks and rocks, their rules incomprehensible to adults. Trey and Eleanor sat on the swing, his arm around her shoulders, watching the sun set. "You ever think about what your life would have been like if you had married Marcus?" Trey asked. Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. I imagine I would have been moderately comfortable and deeply unhappy. He would have resented me and I would have known it. I'm glad you didn't marry him. So am I." Eleanor leaned into her husband's warmth. "If I had, I wouldn't have this. I wouldn't have you and the children and this life we've built." "Funny how the worst day of your life led to the best things in it," Trey mused. "That's usually how it works, I think. You can't appreciate the good without having survived the bad." Tommy ran up to the porch then, breathless with excitement. "Papa, can we go riding tomorrow? You promised we could check the fences on the north section." "I did promise that, didn't I?" Trey ruffled his son's hair. "All right, early morning before it gets too hot. Can I come too?" Clara asked, not wanting to be left out. "And me," Henry added. "You're all too young to help with the fences," Eleanor said, though she was smiling. "But I suppose you could ride out and have a picnic while Papa works." The children cheered and ran back to their game, already planning what foods to bring. Trey laughed and pulled Eleanor closer. "We're going to need more horses if they all keep wanting to ride." "We'll manage. We always do." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sky turned orange and purple. Eleanor thought about that terrible day in the church, about standing at the altar and watching her future walk away. She had thought it was the end of everything. She had been so wrong. It had been the beginning. Years continued to pass. Tommy grew tall like his father and took naturally to ranch work. Clara proved to have a head for numbers and helped Eleanor teach the younger boys their arithmetic. Henry was the dreamer, always coming home with interesting rocks or bird feathers or stories about what he had seen. When Eleanor was 35, she and Trey celebrated their 12th wedding anniversary. They left the children with Mary and took a rare trip to Santa Fe, staying in a hotel and eating in restaurants and simply enjoying being alone together. 12 years, Eleanor said as they walked through the plaza in the evening. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Trey took her hand. I still remember that first day seeing you on those church steps, thinking you were the bravest person I'd ever seen. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what you need to do even though you're scared. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Eleanor, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. I want you to know that. You're the best thing that happened to me too, Eleanor said softly. You saved me, Trey. Not because you rescued me that day, but because you saw me. Really saw me, not just my scars or my humiliation, but who I actually was. That's a gift I'll never be able to repay. You don't need to repay it. That's not how love works. Trey kissed her gently. Besides, you saved me right back. I was just drifting before I met you, no real purpose or direction. You gave me a reason to build something lasting. They continued their walk, talking about the children, about the ranch, about their dreams for the future. It was the kind of conversation they had had 1,000 times before, comfortable and familiar, but no less meaningful for its ordinariness. The trip to Santa Fe became a tradition, a yearly escape where they could reconnect as husband and wife rather than just parents and workers. The children grew older and more independent, which was both a relief and a source of unexpected sadness. Eleanor found herself missing the chaos of toddlerhood even as she appreciated being able to sleep through the night. When Tommy turned 18, he asked his father for permission to court Sarah Mackenzie's younger sister, Rose. Trey gave his blessing, though Eleanor could see it made him feel old. Their firstborn, already thinking about marriage and starting his own family. Clara announced at 16 that she wanted to keep the store accounts for the new owner, who was struggling with the bookkeeping. Eleanor helped her negotiate a fair wage, proud of her daughter's business sense. Henry, at 14, was still figuring out his path, but showed a talent for training horses that might lead to good opportunities. Life continued its steady progression. Mary passed away peacefully in her sleep at 70, surrounded by her family. They buried her next to Eleanor's father, and Eleanor wept for the mother who had never stopped believing she deserved happiness. Walter Morrison retired and sold the ranch to Trey, who had proven himself an excellent manager over the years. It was a huge responsibility, but Trey rose to it with his usual steady competence. Tommy married Rose in a lovely ceremony, and a year later made Eleanor and Trey grandparents for the first time. Holding her grandson, a tiny boy named William, Eleanor was struck by the beautiful continuity of it all. She had survived fire and rejection and heartbreak, and here she was, a grandmother with a husband who still looked at her like she hung the moon. Clara married a quiet man named Daniel who worked at the bank, and they settled in town. Henry, to everyone's surprise, ended up training horses for the army at Fort Bayard, finding his calling in teaching and working with animals. All 3 children were happy and settled, which was all Eleanor had ever wanted for them. On Eleanor's 45th birthday, Trey surprised her with a new house. Not a replacement for their current home, but an expansion, adding on a large parlor and extra bedrooms for when the grandchildren visited. It was extravagant and unnecessary and absolutely perfect. You spoil me, Eleanor said, walking through the new rooms. I like spoiling you. Besides, we need space for all the grandbabies you're going to insist on having over constantly. Eleanor laughed because he was right. She already had 3 grandchildren and another on the way, and she loved having them visit. The house that had once seemed too small for their own children now needed to expand again for the next generation. They settled into the comfortable rhythm of middle age. Trey's hair went gray at the temples, and Eleanor found laugh lines settling in around her eyes. Her scars faded to barely noticeable silver, just another part of her aging face. They weren't running a ranch and raising children any more so much as overseeing and advising, letting the younger generation take over the hard physical work. One evening, sitting on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sun set over the same mountains they had watched for decades, Eleanor said, "Do you ever regret it?" "Regret what?" "Marrying me. Tying yourself to someone marked and damaged when you could have had your pick of whole, pretty girls." Trey turned to look at her with the same intensity he had shown that first day at the church. "Eleanor Ashford, I have never once regretted marrying you, not for a single second of a single day. You are not damaged. You are scarred, which is completely different. And as for pretty girls, I married the prettiest one of all. You're biased, absolutely. I'm biased because I love you, because you're the mother of my children, because you've been my partner and my best friend for more than 20 years. He took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis starting in his knuckles. "When I said beauty isn't what I'm after, I meant it. I was after someone real and honest and strong. I was after someone I could build a life with. That's you, Eleanor. That's always been you." Eleanor felt tears in her eyes, the good kind. "I love you so much. I love you too, forever and always." They sat together in the gathering darkness, hands clasped, watching the first stars appear. Inside the house, they could hear Clara and her family arriving for dinner, the children's excited voices carrying through the open windows. Tomorrow Tommy and his growing brood would come by, and Henry had promised to visit over the weekend with stories about his latest horse training successes. But right now, in this moment, it was just Eleanor and Trey, the scarred woman and the cowboy who had seen past surfaces to the person underneath. They had built a beautiful life together, full of love and laughter and the everyday magic of a partnership that worked. Eleanor thought back to that terrible day at the altar, standing in her wedding dress while her world fell apart. If someone had told her then that the best was yet to come, that her real love story was about to begin, she never would have believed them. But it had been true. Sometimes the worst moments were just doorways to something better, if you were brave enough to walk through them. And she had been brave. They both had. That bravery had been rewarded with this life, these children and grandchildren, these decades of steady love and support. It wasn't always easy or perfect, but it was real and true and theirs. As the years continued to pass, Eleanor and Trey grew old together with grace. They celebrated their 25th anniversary, then their 30th, surrounded by children and grandchildren and even a few great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under Tommy's management, with Henry's expert horse training bringing in additional income, and Clara handling all the financial records with her characteristic precision. Eleanor's scars became just another part of the family history, no more remarkable than the story of how Grandpa Trey's father had been an outlaw, or how great-grandma Mary had run the general store all by herself. The children would sometimes ask about them, and Eleanor would tell the story of the fire, about her father's bravery and her own survival. But it was never told as a tragedy. It was just part of the story of how their family came to be. When Eleanor was 58, she and Trey took a trip back to the church where they had been married. It had been renovated over the years, but the basic structure was the same. They sat in a pew together, Eleanor's head on Trey's shoulder, remembering. "This is where you said you loved me," Eleanor murmured. "This is where I promised to love you forever," Trey corrected. "I started loving you weeks earlier." "When?" The moment you laughed at something I said while we were having lunch at the boarding house. It was this surprised, genuine sound, like you hadn't expected to find anything funny that day. I knew right then I wanted to spend my life making you laugh like that. Eleanor smiled and kissed his cheek. You've done a pretty good job of it. They sat in the peaceful quiet of the church, thinking about all the years behind them and the years still to come. They had been blessed, Eleanor thought. Truly, deeply blessed. Not because their life had been easy or perfect, but because they had faced it together, with love and commitment and unwavering support for each other. As they grew into their 60s, Trey's joints bothered him more, and Eleanor's eyesight began to fail. But they adapted as they always had. Trey taught Tommy everything he needed to know to fully take over the ranch, transitioning into a comfortable retirement. Eleanor spent her days with her grandchildren, teaching them to read and do sums, telling them stories about the old days. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. All 3 children were there with their spouses and children. Tommy had 4 children now, all grown or nearly so. Clara had 3, ranging from teenage to young adult. Henry had 2 boys who were fascinated by everything their grandfather had to say about ranching and horses. Looking around at the crowd of people who existed because of the love she and Trey shared, Eleanor felt overwhelmed with gratitude. This was her legacy. Not the scars she bore or the humiliation she had endured, but this enormous, loving, complicated family. Trey stood to make a toast, his hair now completely white, his face weathered by decades in the sun. 40 years ago, I married the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I'd ever met. 40 years later, I still feel the same way. Eleanor, you've given me everything I could ever want. Thank you for saying yes to a dusty cowboy who didn't have much to offer except his whole heart. You had everything I needed, Eleanor said, standing beside him. You saw me when I felt invisible. You loved me when I felt unlovable. You built this life with me, brick by brick, day by day. I am the luckiest woman in the world. They kissed while their family cheered and whistled. Later, after everyone had gone home and it was just the 2 of them again, Trey and Eleanor sat on their porch swing, a blanket over their legs against the evening chill. 40 years, Eleanor marveled. Where did the time go? Into this, Trey said, gesturing at the house, at the land, at the life they had built. Into every moment we spent together, every challenge we faced, every joy we celebrated. Time well spent, I'd say. The best possible way to spend it, Eleanor agreed. They rocked gently, the swing creaking with familiar comfort. The stars were coming out, brilliant in the clear desert sky. Eleanor thought about the young woman she had been, standing on church steps in a wedding dress, believing her life was over. She wished she could go back and tell that young woman that everything would be all right, better than all right, wonderful, but maybe she didn't need to. Maybe that young woman had found her way to this moment exactly because she hadn't known what was coming, because she had been brave enough to take a chance on a dusty cowboy with kind eyes and an honest heart. Trey, Eleanor said softly. Yes, love. Thank you for seeing past the scars. Thank you for letting me see the woman underneath. He squeezed her hand. Though I have to tell you, I never saw past anything. I just saw you, all of you, and loved what I saw. Eleanor leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his body next to hers. After 40 years, they fit together perfectly, 2 pieces of a puzzle that had found their match. As they sat together in the peaceful evening, Eleanor thought about beauty and worth, and the strange ways life worked out. Marcus had been right to call off their wedding, she realized now. Not because she was unworthy, but because they would have been miserable together. He had been looking for something she could never be, while Trey had been looking for exactly who she was. "Beauty isn't what I'm after," Trey had said, though he had never stopped calling her beautiful. He had meant that surface appearance didn't matter to him, that he was after something deeper and more lasting. And he had found it, just as she had found in him the kind of steady, devoted love she had stopped believing existed. They sat on the porch until the stars filled the sky and the night air grew too cold to ignore. Then they went inside together, hand in hand, to the house they had built, the life they had made, the love they had nurtured for 4 decades and would continue to nurture until their last breath. It was a good life, a beautiful life, and it had started with a scarred woman standing on church steps and a cowboy who saw past surfaces to the person underneath. That was the real love story, Eleanor thought. Not a fairy tale rescue or a dramatic romance, but two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year, building something lasting and true. And in the end, that was worth more than all the unscarred faces and perfect weddings in the world. It was worth everything.